Okay, so before we start this video, this job is a pain in the butt, and sorry, but it's true, and it takes a long time to get the rotor off. So if you don't want to go through all this work, then just hire someone to do it. But if you want to do it yourself, this is a video or instructions of how to do it yourself, and trust me, it is a pain. Subscribe.
Today we're working on a 2009 F350 single rear wheel. We're going to do rear backing plates. The rear backing plates are all rotted out. That's this. The caliper's seized. The mounting bracket is a mass of rust. We're going to put a loaded backing plate on it. We're going to put a caliper mounting bracket on it. We're going to put caliper on it. We have to pull the axle shaft to get the backing plate off. We're going to replace the e-brake shoes because the pins that hold them on are rotted through the backing plate. That's the original problem with the vehicle. So today we're going to get started. We're going to compress the piston cylinders on the caliper so we can remove the caliper, and let's get going. So here we are. We got a C-clamp. You're going to ride it on the inside of the pad. Get the back end against the back side of the caliper. We're going to tighten that. Get a little bit of tolerance on the caliper. Compress it just a tiny bit so it makes it easier to get it off. And then we'll be back with you once we get the caliper off. We're going to hang it from some bungee cords and some brackets. You don't want to let the caliper hang from the brake hose.
That would be pure stupidity.
And then we'll start working on the caliper mounting bracket. This truck has a ton of rust on it. So that's why we're replacing all this stuff. We'll keep you up to date as we go. All right, now we're going to take the caliper off. 16 millimeter on the upper bolt here. The lower bolt down here, see where my finger is? That will take the caliper off. And that, once we get it off, we'll be back. All right, so now we have the caliper off. We have it hanging. Now we're going to take the caliper mounting bracket off. 21 millimeter, upper bolt, lower bolt. We'll take those two off. We'll get the caliper mounting bracket off, and we'll be right back with you in a minute. Okay, so caliper mounting bracket is off. The rotor, of course, was seized on.
Of course.
We had to destroy, come back here, had to destroy the backing plate. Dust shield, doesn't matter. There's a new one with the new backing plate. We have to pound on the back of the rotor.
Yeah, so no way.
Come on in here. Here's the problem, why we replaced them anyway. See this bolt right on the end of my finger? This bolt goes through the backing plate. See the backing plate? It's all Swiss cheese. The hole's gone that it goes through. So the e-brake shoes are all stuck inside the drum.
That's nice.
So they all welded to it. So we had to modify the rotor with our friend Bertha here.
He's nice.
And now that we got the rotor off, we'll see what we got brewing.
Like, I mean, look at this.
What we got going is, here's all the backing plate. It's all gone. Go this way.
That's actually sad.
See where my finger goes through? That's supposed to all be steel. That's supposed to hold the shoes. See how it's been broken away? The shoe's been riding on the inside of the drum right here, grinding away. See how it's got this weird wear line right here? Right here. This has been stuck against the drum as it's been driving, grinding away on the back of the drum. The front shoe is perfect. It always rots out on the side where the caliper sits because it must get salt in there, sand in there. In the winter, we're in the Northeast, and it just rots away there, and that's what holds this shoe in place. and it just makes no backing plate to hold the shoe anymore. So the spring actually pulls it into the drum. So now what we're gonna have to do is take the axle shaft out here. Spread back a little bit.
All right.
These are 18 millimeters. We're gonna take all these out. I'm gonna pull the axle shaft out. Then we gotta take the hub off. We'll take the hub off, and then we're at this mess with the backing plate. Right. And then we'll be working on the back. Come back over here where my finger is. Gotta take these 4 bolts off to get the backing plate off the end of the axle housing. It's all gonna be rotted. The back of the hub seal is gonna be stuck on there. We're gonna have to take that off. There'll be a lot there to mess around with. So we'll get back to you as we keep going. Okay, so the e-brake cable right here at the end of my screwdriver comes through the backing plate. It's got that funky locking tab, got the spring, goes to the adjuster on the back of the backing plate. So you got to release the pressure on this spring. So you take a bunch of zip ties, zip tie that spring, so now the spring just kind of flops around. When you're done with the job, I'll show you how we cut them and put it all back to normal. You want to get the tension off of this because we got to get this cable out of this bracket, which is a nightmare. So I'm going to show you a trick that'll save you hours and hours and all the hassle of most people cut the cable and then you're going through putting cables on the thing that you didn't need and all this nonsense. Here's going to solve your problem. A number 8 worm gear hose clamp. We're going to put that right around there. I'll show you when I have it on. It's going to squeeze these little twangs enough consistently, because there's no way you can grab them with a pair of pliers and squeeze them all consistently to get it out of this bracket. As soon as you put that hose clamp on here, it grabs them all evenly, and then that cable will slide right out. I'll be right back once I get this put on, and I'll show you how simple it is. I'm going to save you hours and hours and hours of cussing and screaming at this thing with a little trick I learned from someone and an old timer.
And you're going to thank us.
So I just had this hose clamp on this right here. I tightened it up. You got to blow it all out, oil it up, get all the rust out of it. You put it right to the edge so you have just a little bit of space, just so when you tighten the clamp, it squeezes all the little fingers. And then as you pull on the cable, you get it out through the hole. This hole is all full of rust and rot. The adjuster's all frozen. So you push the adjuster back more. You want to get this out now because it's hard to pry on this sucker when you have the backing plate taken off. You can't take the cable off here until you can twist the backing plate all around. But it's easier to fight this out of the bracket right there now, because later on it's going to be a holy heaven nightmare. So see, I'm out now. That will make your life much easier to have that out like that now. And then later, once you get the backing plate off, you pull this off. Might be able to get a little bit more throw on that to get it out. Since this adjuster's all frozen here, the more I can get it out, the better off I'll be. I might have to compress this spring a little bit more to get it out, but you want this out. You'll blow all this out now. Take a little compress there. Because putting it back in will be a lot easier if you blow all the dirt out of there. Take a little penetrating oil. A couple dabbles. You don't have to load it.
That's what's called breakaway, by the way.
Breakaway, penetrating oil, PB blaster, anything that works. You'll want to clean this with Scotch-Brite pad before you put it back in the new backing plate. just to get all the rust, blow it all out. It'll make your life much easier doing what I just did once you get the backing plate out. Like I said, I may have to compress this a little bit more just to give myself a little bit more work. But otherwise, we're good to go. We'll be back. So, correction on the hose clamp. I said a number 8 size. Wrong. Number 4. Size number 4. That's the clamp you want. Number 8 are these. Those are too big. Way too big. You want size number 4. I made a mistake. Hose clamp, size number 4, not size number 8. Number 4. Sorry about that. All right, now we're taking out the axle shaft.
18 millimeters.
18 millimeters. Take all the bolts out. And then you just take a hammer or a screwdriver. Give it a little tap. It's coming. Don't go pounding on it. Be gentle with it. Got a little O-ring in there. You gotta pull it by the O-ring gently. Boom. Now it's gonna go take a leak on you. Let it drip for a minute. The more it drips, the less it drips on you. This, we're gonna slide the whole axle shaft out. If you look on the inside, you'll see right here, a little O-ring. See how the outside of the O-ring's all rusty? Where it's been sitting against all the goo?
Yeah, I see it.
Well, that's actually a good sign because it's keeping all the goo and rust out of the seal and out of the axle. So you have to seal as nice. Where's my pick? Follow my pick. Here's the light. So you have to seal as crappy rusty. The other half is nice and juicy. We're going to put a new seal on there anyway. But that's sealing out all the elements from getting in the axle. So that's a good thing. Seal's doing its job. Seal has not failed. So that's a good thing. So we'll pull the axle shaft out. We'll let it drain for a few more minutes. We'll be back. And then we're going to pull the hub off. Then we're going to get the remainder of the inner seal off the hub itself, off the axle tube. And we'll go from there. And we're going to start working on the backing plate after that. But we're going to let it drip for a little while and let all the goo come out. We'll be back with you in a few. So we're going to pull the shaft. You want to put a little downward pressure on because you're pulling it out of the pinion in the differential, because it's going to plunk, it's going to drop down. Because this, you don't have to pull the rear cover to get it out. There's no C-clips on this one. It just holds in with the bolts. Okay, I'm out of the differential. Boom, just dropped. Take it out gently. I always try and balance the weight coming out. This is a clean environment. It's like going to surgery. See, I'm dragging it a little on the tube. That's okay. I'm not hurting anything. Take it out gently. It's not a race. There's nowhere to go fast. Boom.
There you go.
You want to inspect the splines. See what the splines look like. This is a four-wheel drive vehicle. You're working it. Sometimes you pull those out. You're missing a couple teeth. You're missing a couple grooves. You got some twisting. Throw me in my flashlight. Watch the dirt. This is a clean environment. Looks nice. Still got the little ribbies on it where it rides in the differential. Hook that back up. So we're going to take our gooey mess. So going pole vaulting now. Put this somewhere where it's going to stay clean until you're ready for it. We'll be back with you.
And we're putting it on here. on the engine. We just laid towels on it, and that's where we put it.
All right, we'll be back with you guys. We're gonna tuck it in here, put it under the hood, put a rag over it so it doesn't get dirty. We'll clean all that before it goes back in, just so the cover doesn't pull off. It's like a little baby going to bed. Goo goo gaga. All right, now we're taking the hub off. This is the hub. You need a special OTC tool. I think it's 660. I'll get back to that on you. It's a 1/2-inch drive. It releases, it's like a double lock nut. So you put that in, you twist it, you'll get a weird nut plus a little like collar that comes off with it. When you tighten it, yeah, it's a 660 OTC. 660, 6601? 6601, I think it is. OTC socket. It's like $49 on Amazon. You gotta have it. You can't do the job without it. Guys cut it with die grinders and gnarling tools and all this stuff, and just buy the tool, you'll have it. It's good for like 2006 and up, something like that. So you're gonna use it again. It's worth the money. So you're gonna take that nut off. The outer bearing's gonna come off. The hub, you'll just have to wobble it off a little bit to get it off. You're gonna get half of the rear seal with the hub. The other half is gonna stay on the axle tube. Once I get the hub off, I'll show you that. The rear inner bearing will stay with the hub. The outer bearing will come off once I take the nut off. Obviously, clean that outer bearing. It's gear oil lubed. Some guys grease them. I researched with Ford. Ford said it's a wet bearing, and they don't like the fact of high temp grease. If a lot of guys will repack that bearing in high temp grease, because this uses 75-140. This has got the 10.5 ring gear in it, and it's limited slip, so it takes that special XL3 whale oil additive, that little 4.5 ouncer thing you got to get from Ford. All that doesn't like mixing with high temp grease. So they say put the seals back in, wet them with 75-140 gear oil. When you go back together with it, swoosh a little in there before you put your lock nut back on, and then put it all back together. And then once you drive the thing, it starts pushing more fluid down the axle tube. So we'll be back with you in a minute. Oh, by the way, the righty-tighty, lefty-loosey on the passenger side. On the driver's side, it's reverse threads. So if you're trying to tighten, you got to turn it counterclockwise. If you're trying to loosen on the driver's side rear, go the opposite way.
Clockwise.
It's opposites. It's reverse threads on the driver's side. Passenger side rear, it's normal righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. We'll be back with you.
It's really weird.
All right, so we got the hub off. With the lock nut, the bearing came out, the outer bearing. When we pry the hub off, you just take a pry bar. You just pry against the back of the hub. Pry against the back of the hub. Pry against the back of the hub. And you just gently work the hub off. Now we got the hub off. The inner bearing and the rear hub seal is still in the bearing. We'll have to do bench work on that once we get there. Now we got to get the other half of the rear seal off the axle tube. Same way, you got to work it gently against the crappy brake shoes. Getting it off. Try not to, don't damage this. No, I guess you call it the spindle, but the axle tube housing. Don't dig in too deep and damage it, because the new seal rides up and over that. Just like this is the old seal. It's half of it. The other half is in the bearing. So you got to gently work that off. And once you get that off, cover this, protect it. And then we'll work on getting the crappy rotted out backing plate off. We'll be back with you. All right, so we got the hub off. When you take the hub off, you split the back seal in half. This is the back part of the seal. that stays on the rear housing tube. You have to gently pry it off with a pry bar without damaging the spindle. We talked about that. So now I just wrapped a towel around it to protect it, so when you're fighting the backing plate off, you don't damage or nick the tube. Now we're working on the bolts on the back, the 15/16. 15/16.
Right there.
Four bolts. I'll put my wrench on one of them. One on the top, one on the bottom, and then one over here, and one over here. So I'll take those 4 off, and then this whole rotted backing plate is going to pop off. Remember, we already loosened the e-brake cable. This only comes off the adjuster a certain way, so you have to have the backing plate off the vehicle, and then it gives you the ability to twist it up at a different angle to get the cable off. So when you put the new backing plate on, after you do all your work prepping it, you'll put that cable back on before you put the backing plate on, because otherwise you're not going to get it back on. So I'll be back once we're at that point, and we'll go from there. Okay, so I taped all the way around my sweet spot where seal rides. Now if you look, follow my pick, all the way from here to this nice little spot here. We want to grind all this stuff off, all this rust, clean up this flange surface, this whole edge here. See it? All the rust coming off. All this. See how it's all, see all that? Mm-hmm. Stop moving. I want to clean this whole bearing edge here. You want to clean in here, in this, and then the flange surface here. All the way around. All this flaking yuck. This whole edge here, here. Take your time. Take your grinder. I'll show you what I'm going to use. I'm going to use this on the end of a drill. I'll do a nice clean line around the tape line. Do as much as I can with this. I'll come in against the flange with a cup sander. And I'll do all in here, all in here, all here. And then I'll wire brush the axle tube here. Clean it with a little brake clean. And then once I get everything clean, I'll spray it with a little rust inhibitor. We'll get to that in a few minutes, and I'll show you everything I'm going to do from there. But I'm going to start grinding some rust. You southern people probably won't even see this. You won't even know what this stuff is. This is rust. Anyone in the north, you guys know exactly what I'm dealing with. All right, we'll be back. All right, we've ground all the rust with our cup washer.
It's called a drill.
We've taped it all off. We've cleaned this whole flange where the backing plate hooks to. We ground all the rust off of this. All the rust off the back where the bolts sit. All this surface here. Cleaned up all that. So now we're going to put some primer on it. Rust-Oleum makes some good stuff. It's called Rust Reformer. I like this stuff. I'll spray all this very well. I'll spray the back side of the flange. I'll let that sit overnight, and then I'll put some Rust-Oleum flat or gloss on it. I think I'm going to put gloss on this one just because I put gloss on the other side. And then we'll let that sit for a day, and then we'll start putting everything back together. So next time you see that, it'll be all nice and shiny. I got the spindle all taped off nicely. And here we go. This is the axle nut that you need to get the rear hubs off. OTC 6601. Like I said, it's on Amazon. It's like 49 bucks. I don't think there's any other way to get that lock nut off without this. So you gotta have it.
Yeah. 6601 right there.
Okay, so we're putting the backing plate back on. The 4 bolts. Actually, the studs are part of the backing plate, so all we have is 4 nuts to put on. Before you do that, you put the parking brake cable back in. This cable only goes on this hook a certain way. So you gotta hook this on first, and then pull this cable back through this notch, which is part of the backing plate, and then push it through so the twangers twang it. I always put a little wheel bearing grease on there, make it slide in better, protect it. There's a lot of salt, sand, dirt, and everything in there, so a little grease is not going to hurt it. Once we get these 4 nuts tightened up to tighten the backing plate to the axle, we'll torque them. Then we'll cut all these zip ties out of this spring and reposition that spring in the way it's supposed to be. I'll give you a video of that when we're done. And then it's a matter of putting the drum back on and adjusting the shoes, and we'll go back together even further. We'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, so the backing plate is on. I'm still protecting the axle tube. Check this surface right here. That's where the inner seal is going to ride against. Run your finger over it. Make sure there's no nicks in it from when you were prying off the back part of that seal from when we were taking it apart. If there is any nicks or anything, take a little emery cloth, smooth it out. You don't want to be too aggressive. You don't want to nick there. When you put the new seal over it, it cuts the new seal. Then you're going to be leaking gear oil. So these backing plates come, shoes already attached, adjusters already attached, all the mounting hardware is already attached. Everything is there. All you have to do is put the backing plate with the dust shield, with the shoes, the hardware. All you got to put all that through the hub. Remember, come on the back side. Don't forget about the e-brake cable. I cut all the zip ties off the spring. Put a little grease on the bracket. I tightened the 4 nuts. I went to 114 foot-pounds. That's what Ford says for a 2009 F350 single rear wheel. And now we're ready to go bench the hub, take the other part of the inner seal off the back. The inner bearing will come out. We got to clean it all and then put the new put the bearing back in, put the new rear seal in. Then we'll come back to the vehicle and start to install it and set the preload. So we'll be back with you. I always check these dust shields when you get them out of the box from Ford. The animals are always bent, twisted. Try and get them back as good as you can. They throw them around, knock them around. They come out of the box. They're all folded up. You got to bend them. This had a little bend right up in here. We fixed it. That's going to scrape against the back side of your rotor once you get the rotor on, if it's all bent up. So you want to get that as smooth and as normal as you can. We'll be back in a few more minutes. All right, this is the back side of the hub. We replaced the seal. Well, the back part of it we pulled out. The bearing we put back in. Then you have the seal itself. When you take it out, you got to clean the inside of that hub really well. Lubricate it with a little oil. Get some of that on it. Clean everything, lube it. Tap it in gently. I use a plastic hammer. Make sure your gap of your seal to the housing is nice and tight. Don't beat it to a pulp with a metal hammer. You'll just ruin the seal. That's why I use a plastic one. The more cleaning you do, the better that seal is going to go down. And then what I do is I take some gear oil and I put it across the top just to let it soak in through the seal and on the bearing surface, because we're going to put it back on the axle tube. I put a little tiny bit of wheel bearing grease, like a real fine bit, on the axle tube spindle before I put this on, and then we're going to install the hub back on the end of the axle tube. I'm going to tighten that lock nut, and then we'll be back once we get that back together. All right, we're putting the axle back in. I lubed it up with gear oil. Right up here, new O-ring. I lubed that up big time. Get it nice and juicy. Going slowly. I like to give it a little nudge. Boom. You hear that? Tunk. It's set. Now I'll take a couple bolts. Put that down. Go get the bolts. I'll put a couple bolts in just to line them up. 18 millimeter. I won't torque them yet until I get a few in. I always crisscross them. One on the left. One on the right. I'm going to put one on the top. I'll get another one. I'll put it in the bottom. I'll need another nut, another bolt. I like to put 4 in, snug them up. I won't tighten them up. I won't torque them. I won't do anything. I like to get them all in. I juice that O-ring up nice and juicy. We'll get to torquing them in a few minutes. There should be no gear oil that gets past this front cover because of that O-ring. The only reason why gear oil is going to leak out of here now, if it ever did, would be because that O-ring didn't seat properly, but we felt it and heard it boom, drop into place. So chances are pretty good. We oiled the heck out of it, because if you put it in dry, it can cut it versus let it slide into place. So you always want to make sure it's well lubed. I marked the hub and the axle shaft, but it means nothing. It goes in any way you want it. Doesn't matter. I'll just snug them. We'll torque them later. You don't want to reef these right now. Once you come to torque them, a lot of people say torque them after you get the tire on and this and that. Normally what I'm going to do is I'll put a couple lug nuts on with a pry bar and I'll torque against the pry bar, because when you're torquing it, you can inadvertently turn it based on the drivetrain, because you'll back it or turn it forward in the drivetrain. So you're not going to get a proper torque unless you put a pry bar out and support yourself. So we'll be back in a little bit and we'll go to the next step. Okay, we're prepping the caliper mounting bracket for the new pads. Here's the old caliper mounting bracket. You want to check the slides. These work fine. They're nice and loose. The other side, one was seized. These are the pads. So we got new caliper mounting brackets just because of all the rust and rot. You're going to need some brake caliper grease. You want to take that. You want to wipe it into the surface where the pads are going to ride. Here. You you have your brake pads with your clips. These clips are a real pain in the neck to get lined up in the caliper mounting brackets. Some people put these on after you put the caliper mounting bracket on the vehicle. I like to put them on ahead of time just because you can play with them, mess around with them, and get them to go in. These clips can go on a million different ways. They can be backwards, right side up, inside out. They just slide on the end. What you want them to look like is these little spring pieces right here will ride against the top of the caliper mounting bracket. Look at this one. See how it's riding against right there? Same thing here. What it does is it allows the pad to move in and out when the caliper squeezes, and then the bracket actually pulls it backwards to get it away from the rotor. It's like a little mini spring. So you want to make sure you put them in the right way. You grease that slide up where the pads will ride, and then you fight your way in with the pads. Preferably keeping your hands from getting all gooey. Sometimes you have to help them. There, that one's in. I think it's in. You want to be able to, there, that one's in. See how that flexes like that? Slide back away so they can see. You want it to be able to slide like that. This one hasn't, there. There. Okay, that looks good. Okay. The springs work so good, it keeps pulling it out. Well, you get the hint. So we'll put the pads in. Once we get it on the car, get it bolted on, we'll come back and we'll show you how we realign the pads. All right, we'll be back. Okay, we got the caliper mounting bracket on. That, if you remember, was a 21 millimeter. Tighten it here. Tighten it here. I go to 125 foot-pounds on that. I put the pads in already. Now I just put the caliper on. This caliper comes with new bolts, new everything, so I'm putting all new bolts in. So you want to tighten the upper and lower up. You got to remember this little triangular piece of the caliper pin meets into a little slot on the inside of the caliper, so you don't have to put a wrench on this or anything. Once you start tightening it down, it automatically will hold it tight. So you got to make sure you have that in just the right way when you tighten it. Otherwise, you're going to put the caliper on sideways. Then the caliper slides. See how the caliper slides on the pin? the caliper will slide like this. Watch right there. You won't do that after you bleed the brakes, obviously, but that shows that it's sliding properly on the piston, on the pins, and it's pushing the pads in as you go in. So these, I'm going to tighten the caliper mounting bolts. I'm going to go to 55 PSI. Yes.
I think so.
55 PSI. I'm going to tighten those. And then it'll be time to transfer the brake line from the old caliper to the new caliper. Once you get this bolt off the old caliper, the mating surface, you're going to want to clean it with a piece of emery cloth or Scotch-Brite. There's going to be a lot of rusty, gooey stuff on the outer part. All this mess. It's going to come, this caliper comes with a new bolt and 2 new copper washers. Never reuse the copper washers. I always use the new ones. If they don't give them to you, go get them. And that's where we are for now. We'll be back in a few minutes. We're on the home stretch.